The colossal crystalline chamber of the Galactic Council orbiting Riel Prime gleamed with an almost painful brilliance, refracting the light of the nearby star across the faces of 200 different species. It was the year 3248 of the interstellar era, and for the third consecutive year, humanity held a seat at this grand assembly, though not without controversy. Ambassador Jake Morrison sat with ramrod posture in the human delegation's assigned space, a modestly sized platform near the outer ring. As usual, the more established species commanded the central positions, their representatives lounging on elaborately decorated platforms that hovered closer to Chairman Vextol's imposing crystalline form. Jake's weathered face betrayed little emotion, though his blue eyes occasionally flashed with irritation when particularly dismissive comments drifted his way. 20 years of diplomatic service had taught him patience, but 3 years of condescension from the Council was testing its limits. From the observer's gallery above, Captain Lisa Rodriguez of the human vessel. Tara's voice watched with mounting frustration. The sleek lines of her dress uniform couldn't hide her military bearing, and her dark eyes missed nothing as she surveyed the assembled delegates. This session marked her third escort mission for Ambassador Morrison, and each visit left her more convinced that the Council viewed humanity as little more than amusing children. The trade restriction on quantum resonators to human colonies remains in effect, intoned the Zephyran delegate, his gelatinous form rippling with superiority. The species is simply too young to be trusted with technology capable of destabilizing star systems. Jake fought to keep his expression neutral. The fact that humanity had independently developed safe quantum resonator technology before contact was apparently irrelevant. Under Council protocols, humans were forbidden from utilizing their own inventions without oversight. Oversight that came with exorbitant licensing fees and technology sharing requirements that exclusively benefited established Council members. "The delegate from Terra wishes to speak," Chairman Vextol announced, his voice reverberating through the chamber as light pulsed through his crystalline body. Jake rose, feeling the familiar weight of representing 12 billion humans spread across 17 worlds. "The Colonial Alliance of Terra thanks the Council for its continued guidance." The diplomatic platitude tasted bitter on his tongue. "However, I must once again emphasize that our colonies on Epsilon Eridani and Tau Ceti are experiencing critical infrastructure failures that could be immediately resolved with our existing quantum resonator technology." The Drari representative, a massive reptilian figure draped in ceremonial metals, made a dismissive gesture with one clawed hand. Perhaps the humans should focus on technologies appropriate to their developmental stage, rather than overreaching. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Zephyran delegates' form rippled again, this time with what Jake recognized as their species equivalent of laughter. Indeed, after all, a species that still clings to the joke they call democracy can hardly be expected to manage sophisticated technologies responsibly. The chamber filled with the various sounds of alien amusement. Something snapped inside Jake Morrison. 3 years of patronizing treatment, of watching human colonies struggle under arbitrary restrictions, while the Council grew fat on the resources of newer members. 1,000 small indignities crystallized into a single moment of absolute clarity. He stood straighter, letting silence fall across the chamber before speaking. "The Colonial Alliance of Terra hereby announces the immediate and complete severing of all diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council." The chamber erupted in chaos. Chairman Vextol's crystalline form flashed with alarmed pulses of light. "Ambassador Morrison, surely—" "Human space is now closed to all Council vessels, effective immediately," Jake continued, his voice carrying through the uproar. "Any Council ship entering human-controlled space will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly." The Altarian delegate, whose species had significant trading interests in human territories, rose on his 4 tentacle-like limbs. "This is preposterous. You cannot simply—" We can... We will. Jake swept his gaze around the chamber, making eye contact with as many delegates as possible. For 3 years, we have endured your condescension while offering nothing but cooperation. For 3 years, we have watched our colonies suffer under restrictions that serve no purpose but to maintain your economic dominance. The Drari representative snarled, displaying rows of serrated teeth. You primitive creatures dare to challenge the Council's authority? Your species will be crushed. Jake smiled then, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. Try us. In the gallery, Lisa Rodriguez felt a surge of fierce pride. Subspace communications to the human fleet had already been sent. She knew. Plans long in preparation were now activating across human space. Jake turned his back on the Council, a deliberate breach of protocol, and walked toward the exit. Over his shoulder, he delivered his parting words. The age of the Council's unchallenged authority ends today. As the doors sealed behind him, he heard Chairman Vextel frantically calling for order as the chamber descended into bedlam. In the corridor, Lisa fell into step beside him, her expression grim but determined. You realize what you've just done? Jake nodded, feeling lighter than he had in years. I've given humanity its dignity back. And potentially started a war, she added, though without criticism. Perhaps. Jake's pace increased as they headed toward their ship. But I suspect we'll find we're not as alone in our frustrations as the Council believes. The gleaming hull of Terra's Voice awaited them in the docking bay, its engines already warming for immediate departure. Behind them, the crystalline chamber of the Galactic Council continued to echo with outrage and disbelief. The galaxy was about to change irrevocably, and humanity had fired the first shot without a single weapon being discharged. Admiral Pete Collins stood on the bridge of the UES, defiant, watching the approaching Altarian freighter convoy with grim determination. His silver-streaked hair and lined face spoke of decades of service, but today's duty weighed more heavily than most. They're requesting permission to proceed to New Montana, Admiral, his communications officer reported, citing previous trade agreements and scheduled deliveries. Collins nodded. Open a channel. The view screen filled with the elongated features of an Altarian trademaster, its skin flushed deep orange with agitation. Admiral Collins, what is the meaning of this blockade? We have contracts. Those contracts were negotiated under Council oversight, Collins interrupted calmly. As of yesterday, the Colonial Alliance of Terra no longer recognizes Council authority or agreements made under its auspices. Your vessels are not permitted to enter human space. This is outrageous. The economic damage is regrettable but necessary. Collins leaned forward slightly. Your vessels will turn around immediately, or they will be turned around. The choice is yours, Trademaster. The Altarian's skin darkened further. You would fire upon unarmed trading vessels? I would deploy my tractor arrays to redirect your course, Collins clarified. Though I note your unarmed vessels are carrying energy signatures consistent with Drari pulse cannons, weapons prohibited on trading vessels under the very Council regulations you're so eager to invoke. The Trademaster's surprised blink confirmed Collins' intelligence. This is an act of economic warfare. The Council will not stand for it. The Council's opinion no longer concerns us. You have 5 minutes to alter course, or I will alter it for you. Collins terminated the transmission and turned to his executive officer. Prepare tractor arrays and have weapons on standby. I doubt they'll try anything, but I won't risk our people on that assumption. Exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds later, the Altarian convoy began a lumbering turn back toward Council space. Similar scenes played out across the borders of human territory. At Alpha Centauri, Tau Ceti, Epsilon Eridani, and a dozen other systems. Human vessels turned away Council ships, sometimes trader convoys, sometimes diplomatic envoys. And in 3 instances, military observers that bristled with barely concealed weaponry. The economic shockwaves were immediate and severe. Council markets that had grown dependent on human resources and consumption plummeted. Altarian shipping concerns, which had dominated trade with human colonies, saw their stock values halve in a single day. The Zephyrin Mercantile Exchange, which had heavily invested in controlling the flow of advanced technology to human worlds, faced collapse as their monopoly evaporated overnight. But the most significant confrontation occurred at New Terra, humanity's most distant and resource-rich colony. Captain Amy Patterson stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, facing a situation far more dangerous than a merchant convoy. On her view screen, arrayed in attack formation, hovered 12 Drari warships, sleek, predatory vessels whose hulls gleamed with the trophies of previous conquests. "They're hailing us, Captain," her communications officer reported, voice steady despite the clear threat they faced. "On screen," Patterson ordered, her posture perfect. Her auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun that emphasized her sharp features and determined green eyes. The screen filled with the imposing visage of a Drari war chief, his scaled face adorned with the metal implants that signified his rank. "Human vessel," he growled. "The Drari hegemony claims this system by right of council authority. Your colony will submit to our governance, or we will reduce it to ash." Patterson's expression remained impassive. "War Chief, New Terra is a sovereign human colony. Your presence here is an act of aggression against the colonial alliance. I suggest you withdraw." The Drari's laugh was like stones grinding together. "You suggest? One human vessel against 12 Drari war cruisers. And you suggest?" His eyes narrowed. "The Council warned us of human arrogance, but this exceeds even those warnings. My suggestion comes not from arrogance, but courtesy." Patterson replied, "A final opportunity to avoid the consequences of your actions." The war chief snarled, "You have 1 hour to surrender your colony, or we attack. And Captain, we will keep you alive long enough to witness what happens to those who defy the Drari." The transmission cut off. Patterson turned to her tactical officer. "Status of our defensive grid?" "Online and tracking, Captain. All 67 satellites have locked targeting systems on the Drari vessels." She nodded. "And our new friends?" Her first officer allowed himself a small smile. "In position and awaiting your command." "Very good." Patterson settled into her command chair. "The Drari never bothered to learn about our defensive capabilities. Their intelligence is outdated. For the past year, while publicly complying with Council restrictions, humanity had been quietly deploying a network of advanced defensive satellites around their colonies. Technology developed in secret laboratories and manufactured in facilities hidden within asteroid belts and beneath planetary oceans. Moreover, the Indomitable was far from alone. Concealed by advanced cloaking fields, another technology the Council believed humans didn't possess, 5 additional heavy cruisers waited in strategic positions around the system. When the Drari attack came 53 minutes later, the war chief's confidence evaporated in the face of humanity's preparedness. The defensive grid neutralized the first wave of Drari weapons with apparent ease, while Patterson's hidden fleet decloaked and executed a pincer movement that left the aggressors surrounded. "War Chief," Patterson hailed after the Drari had lost 3 vessels without inflicting significant damage on the human forces. "I again suggest you withdraw." The stunned silence that followed spoke volumes. When the Drari fleet finally retreated, limping back toward Council space, the message sent throughout the galaxy was unmistakable. Humanity had not only declared independence from Council authority but had the military capability to enforce that declaration. On Earth, President Nathan Clark convened an emergency session with representatives of various non-Council species who had arrived secretly in the days following Jake Morrison's dramatic withdrawal. The presidential palace in New Geneva hummed with activity, as delegates from a dozen worlds were escorted through secure corridors to a conference room designed specifically for this historic gathering. Clark, a tall man with dark skin and silver-streaked hair that belied his 50 years, stood as the final delegates entered. "Friends," he began, "today marks the beginning of a new era in galactic relations. The Colonial Alliance of Terra thanks you for your courage in answering our call. Despite the Council's prohibitions against unauthorized diplomatic contact." Around the table sat a diverse array of beings. Ben Turner, representative of the independent Kepler miners. His body adapted for low-gravity environments with elongated limbs and reinforced spine. 3 tidy researchers, their translucent bodies glowing with internal bioluminescence. A delegation from the Barnard shipyards, their exoskeletons clicking softly as they shifted in their specially designed chairs. And medical researchers from the Epsilon colony, their 4 eyes constantly scanning and recording everything around them. "The Council has maintained its authority through division," Clark continued, "by keeping emerging species isolated, by controlling the flow of technology and resources, by presenting itself as the only viable path to galactic citizenship. Today, we prove that narrative false." Ben Turner spoke, his voice resonating strangely through his adapted vocal cords. "The Kepler Mining Collective has suffered under Council quotas for generations. We produce the rare elements needed for advanced technology. Yet we live in poverty while Council worlds grow wealthy from our labor." The tidy researchers pulsed in agreement, their translator converting their light patterns to speech. "Our research into terraforming has been suppressed because it threatens Council control over habitable worlds. They claim safety concerns. Yet our methods have been proven safe through decades of testing." One by one, each delegation shared similar stories of innovation suppressed, resources exploited, and autonomy denied. The pattern was clear. The Council maintained its power by keeping non-member species dependent and divided. "What humanity proposes," President Clark said once all had spoken, "is an alliance of equals. No central authority dictating development paths or restricting technology. No artificial hierarchies or exploitative trade agreements. Instead, mutual respect, open exchange of ideas, and collective security. The Council will not allow this." One of the Barnard representatives clicked through their translator. "They will use military force." Clark nodded gravely. "They may try, but as recent events at New Terra have demonstrated, the Council has underestimated humanity's defensive capabilities. We believe they have similarly underestimated all of you." The meeting continued for hours, discussing logistics, security arrangements, and the framework for what would become known as the Free Worlds Coalition. By the time the delegates departed, through separate exits and on staggered schedules to avoid Council surveillance, the foundation for a revolutionary new galactic order had been laid. In the aftermath of the meeting, Jake Morrison found himself standing beside President Clark on the balcony overlooking the presidential gardens. The first genuine smile in months on his face. "It's really happening," he said quietly. "When I walked out of that Council chamber, part of me wondered if I'd just doomed humanity to isolation or worse." Clark placed a hand on his shoulder. "You gave voice to what many species have felt for generations. The Council's time was ending. It just needed someone with the courage to say so publicly. And the military capacity to back it up," Jake added wryly. "That too." Clark's expression grew more serious. "But this is just the beginning. The Council has ruled for thousands of years. They won't relinquish that power easily." Jake nodded, his momentary elation tempered by the reality of the challenges ahead. "No. But for the first time since humanity joined the galactic community, I feel like we're standing upright instead of kneeling. On the Terra's voice, now stationed in orbit above Earth. Lisa Rodriguez reviewed the security protocols for the upcoming diplomatic mission to the Kepler Mining Collective. As the newly appointed commander of Coalition Diplomatic Security, she carried responsibility for protecting the nascent alliance's representatives as they traveled between member worlds. "The Council will have agents watching every move," her security chief warned during their briefing. "And they're not above assassination to maintain their control." Lisa nodded grimly. "Which is why we'll be using randomized jump patterns and decoy vessels, and why every member of this crew has been personally vetted." She felt a complex mixture of emotions about recent events: pride in humanity's stand against Council arrogance, concern about the potential for violent conflict, and a growing sense of purpose that transcended her military training. This wasn't just about human independence anymore. It was about reshaping the galaxy into something more just. As Jake Morrison and Lisa Rodriguez grappled with their new roles in a rapidly changing galactic landscape, scientific breakthroughs were occurring on human colonies that would accelerate the transformation beyond anyone's expectations. On New Montana, the gleaming laboratories of the Quantum Research Institute hummed with activity day and night. Dr. Helen Wright and Dr. Carl Johnson led a team that had been secretly working on revolutionary technologies for years, their efforts hidden from Council inspectors through elaborate deceptions. Helen, a brilliant theoretical physicist with cropped silver hair and penetrating gray eyes, stood before a holographic display showing the schematics for their latest breakthrough. "The quantum communication network is stable," she announced to the assembled team. "With the removal of Council restrictions, we can finally deploy it openly." Carl, whose lanky frame and perpetually disheveled appearance belied his methodical mind, nodded in agreement. "And the new energy core prototypes are exceeding all expectations. Power output is 327% higher than our previous best design, with quantum containment fields showing no signs of degradation." For years, humanity had been developing technologies far beyond what they revealed to the Council, anticipating a day when they might need to stand alone. That day had come, and the carefully hidden innovations were now being rapidly implemented across human space. The quantum communication network was perhaps the most significant breakthrough, enabling instantaneous communication across any distance without the need for traditional subspace relays controlled by the Council. Within weeks of its deployment, human colonies that had previously been isolated from each other by Council-imposed communication bottlenecks were freely exchanging information, coordinating defenses, and sharing technological innovations. The energy cores represented another leap forward, providing human vessels and colonies with power sources that were cleaner, more efficient, and dramatically more powerful than anything the Council had permitted. Factories that had been energy-constrained now operated at full capacity, producing advanced defensive systems, medical equipment, and civilian infrastructure that transformed colonial life. In a bold move that shocked the Council and inspired non-member species throughout the galaxy, Dr. Helen Wright authorized the broadcast of detailed schematics for many of these innovations on open channels. "Knowledge belongs to everyone," she declared in the transmission that accompanied the technical data. "The Council's monopoly on technology ends today." The impact was immediate and profound. Species that had been technologically dependent on the Council suddenly had access to alternatives. Independent research facilities across dozens of worlds began implementing and improving upon the human designs, creating a cascade of innovation that the Council could neither control nor contain. On Real Prime, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session, its crystalline chamber now filled with tension and fear rather than the complacent superiority that had characterized it for centuries. "This is unprecedented," declared the Altarian delegate, his tentacles lashing with agitation. "The humans are not merely defying our authority, they are actively undermining the entire foundation of Council governance." Chairman Vextel's crystalline form showed subtle signs of stress, microscopic fractures appearing along previously flawless facets. Our intelligence reports indicate that 17 non-member species have established formal diplomatic relations with the human coalition, he intoned, his voice lacking its usual resonance. And shipping revenues from Council-controlled trade routes have decreased by 38% in the past month alone. The Zephyran delegate, whose earlier mockery of human democracy had helped trigger the crisis, rippled with anxiety. We must respond with decisive force. The Drari fleet was humiliated at New Terra, interrupted the Drari representative, fury evident in his snarling voice. The humans possess defensive capabilities far beyond what our intelligence suggested, and now they are sharing those capabilities with others. Perhaps, ventured a delegate from one of the younger council species, we should consider negotiation, offer concessions to bring the humans back into... Appeasement is not an option. The Zephyran's form pulsed violently. If we show weakness now, others will follow the human example. The Council's authority derives from our absolute unity in the face of challenge. But that unity was already fracturing. 3 minor council members had quietly begun their own diplomatic overtures to the human coalition. Trade agreements that had stood for centuries were being renegotiated or simply ignored, and species that had been patiently waiting centuries for council membership were withdrawing their applications, turning instead to the more egalitarian structure offered by the humans. As the council debated increasingly desperate measures to reassert control, a more clandestine meeting was taking place on Epsilon Eridani, a neutral trading hub beyond council jurisdiction. Dr. Carl Johnson sat across from Sub-Chancellor Kixall of the Galactic Council. The meeting arranged through layers of intermediaries and plausible deniability. The Council is prepared to offer significant concessions, Kixall stated, his crystalline appendages arranged in a formal pattern, denoting sincerity. Full technological autonomy for human colonies, accelerated trade privileges, even a central position in the Council chamber. Carl maintained a neutral expression. Those are the same privileges the Council has always dangled before species it wishes to control. Sub-Chancellor, what you're offering is a more comfortable form of submission. You misunderstand. Kixall leaned forward. The Council is evolving. Your demonstration of independence has catalyzed discussions of reform that have been suppressed for generations. We seek not your submission, but your participation in guiding these reforms. A compelling narrative, Carl acknowledged, but one that contradicts every action the Council has taken since humanity's withdrawal. The blockades of independent trading vessels, the attempted military action at New Terra, the economic sanctions against species that engage with the coalition, regrettable actions by conservative elements, Kixall dismissed, elements that are losing influence with each passing day. What Kixall didn't know was that Carl was broadcasting their entire conversation to the Colonial Senate on Earth and to coalition partners across the galaxy. The Council's attempt at secret diplomacy, at dividing the coalition through privileged offers to humanity, was being witnessed by all the species they had oppressed. When the Colonial Senate voted unanimously to reject the Council's overtures, doing so in a public session with representatives from 23 coalition species in attendance, the message was unmistakable. The old order of secret deals and hierarchical control was over. The galactic landscape continued to shift rapidly in the months that followed. The Council's authority eroded as more species joined the coalition, drawn by its principles of technological openness, mutual defense, and equal representation regardless of a species' age or development stage. But amid this political transformation, a new crisis emerged that would test the coalition's principles and capabilities in unexpected ways. Deep space monitoring stations detected unusual energy patterns emanating from the Andromeda galaxy, patterns that corresponded with a disturbing phenomenon. Stars near the energy source were being systematically drained of power, their luminosity decreasing at an accelerating rate. The Council, paralyzed by internal discord and diminished resources, could offer no coordinated response. Instead, it was the coalition that assembled a mission to investigate and potentially address the threat, a mission that included ships and specialists from 12 different species, commanded by human Colonel Frank Martinez. Colonel Martinez stood on the bridge of the coalition vessel, Unity, watching the main view screen as they emerged from their final quantum jump. Before them loomed the source of the energy disturbance, a colossal artificial structure, approximately the size of Earth's moon. Its surface a complex latticework of unknown materials that bent light in ways that defied conventional physics. Energy absorption increasing, reported the Kepler sensor specialist, their elongated fingers dancing across control surfaces. The nearest star has lost 7% of its output since we arrived. Martinez nodded grimly. His weathered face and close-cropped gray hair reflected decades of military service, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for a threat of this magnitude. Maintain safe distance. All sensors at maximum resolution. Let's understand what we're dealing with before we make any moves. For 3 days, the Coalition Task Force observed and analyzed the artifact. It exhibited clear signs of artificial design, but showed no response to communication attempts across all known frequencies and methods. Meanwhile, the stellar drain continued, with predictive models suggesting that inhabited systems would begin to be affected within weeks. We need to consider intervention options, Martinez announced during a briefing with specialists from all represented species. If we can't communicate with it or deactivate it remotely, we may need to consider more direct approaches. Various proposals were discussed: targeted energy weapons to disrupt the artifact's power collection systems, quantum field manipulators to interfere with its operations, even deploying explosive devices at key structural points identified by their analysis. But Zethar, a researcher from the Tieti species, whose translucent body pulsed with thoughtful light patterns, raised an alternative possibility. I believe, the translator conveyed, that what we are interpreting as power absorption may actually be a form of communication. The briefing room fell silent. Explain, Martinez prompted. Zethar's body glowed more intensely. The energy pattern being extracted from the stars is not random. It contains mathematical sequences, prime numbers, geometric progressions, quantum harmonics. It's too ordered to be merely consumption. You're suggesting the artifact is talking to the stars? Martinez's skepticism was evident in his tone. Not to the stars, Zethar clarified. Through them, using stellar energy to broadcast a message across galactic distances. It was an outlandish theory, but as the Coalition's scientists reviewed Zethar's analysis, supporting evidence mounted, the energy fluctuations did indeed contain patterns too complex and orderly to be coincidental. If it's a message, Martinez questioned, can we respond? Can we tell it that its conversation is endangering living worlds? Zethar's light patterns shifted to what the human members of the crew had come to recognize as confidence. I believe so. By modulating our quantum field generators to match the harmonic patterns of the energy absorption, we could essentially join the conversation. The attempt was not without risk. Positioning the Unity close enough to the artifact to generate a detectable response would place them within range of whatever mechanisms the structure used to manipulate stellar energy. If Zethar's theory was wrong, they could find their own power systems drained, or worse. But the alternative, allowing the stellar drain to continue until inhabited systems began to suffer, was unacceptable. Proceed, Martinez ordered, after consulting with his multi-species command staff. But be ready to quantum jump at the first sign of danger. What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary first contact in galactic history. Using the Coalition's advanced quantum field technology, ironically, developed in secret to circumvent Council restrictions, Zethar established a rudimentary communication link with the artifact. The entity controlling the structure was ancient beyond comprehension. A synthetic intelligence created by a species that had vanished from Andromeda billions of years ago. It had been designed to collect and store stellar energy as a power reserve for its creators, activating automatically when certain cosmic conditions were met. It had no awareness that its actions threatened living worlds. Indeed, it had no concept of biological life as the Coalition understood it. But once this was conveyed through the painstaking mathematical and quantum exchanges that constituted their communication, the entity proved willing to adjust its operations. Over the course of 5 tense days, the Coalition team negotiated an agreement. The artifact would redirect its energy collection to uninhabited star systems and would share some of its stored power with worlds affected by its activities. In return, the Coalition would establish permanent communication relays to maintain contact with the entity and share knowledge of the galaxy's development since its creator's disappearance. When news of the successful negotiations spread throughout the galaxy, the contrast with the Council's inaction could not have been more stark. Here was definitive proof that the Coalition's approach, combining diverse perspectives, sharing technology openly, and prioritizing communication over confrontation, could address threats that the Council's rigid hierarchy could not. 7 more Council species announced their withdrawal in the week following the Andromeda resolution, effectively rendering the once mighty Galactic Council a hollow shell of its former self. On Real Prime, Chairman Vexthal faced the reality of the Council's collapse. The crystalline chamber that had once hosted representatives from hundreds of worlds now echoed with emptiness, as fewer than 30 species maintained their membership, most of them so deeply integrated into Council economic and political structures that withdrawal was more difficult than remaining. Vextol's physical form showed advanced signs of degradation, cracks spreading through his crystalline body, the light within dimming noticeably. Among his species, such deterioration was linked directly to psychological distress and loss of purpose. "The Council has stood for 8,000 years," he lamented to his few remaining advisors. "We have guided the galaxy through countless crises, maintained peace among species that would otherwise have destroyed each other. Through control and suppression," noted one advisor, whose own position had grown precarious enough to risk such honesty. Perhaps that approach has reached its natural conclusion. Indeed it had. Within a month, the formal dissolution of the Galactic Council was announced. In a final irony, Chairman Vexthal himself requested membership in the Human Colonial Alliance, now simply called the Galactic Alliance, citing his species' need for new purpose in a changed cosmos. The crystalline chamber on Real Prime, once the seat of absolute galactic authority, was preserved as a museum of authoritarian collapse, a reminder of how even the most entrenched power structures can fail when they prioritize control over cooperation. Kepler 442b, with its breathable atmosphere and moderate gravity, was established as the Alliance capital, chosen specifically because it had been one of the world's most exploited by Council resource extraction policies. Where strip mining operations had once scarred its surface, gleaming cities now rose, their architecture incorporating elements from dozens of member species. The Universal Rights Charter, ratified by all Alliance members, enshrined principles that would have been unthinkable under Council rule: absolute technological autonomy for all species, prohibition of economic exploitation, protection of developing civilizations without restricting their growth, and equal representation regardless of a species' age, technology level, or population size. Mixed species schools appeared across Alliance worlds, with curricula that emphasized shared knowledge rather than the Council's practice of carefully measured information release. Research institutes operating on principles of open collaboration made breakthroughs at an unprecedented rate, solving problems that had plagued individual species for generations. Colonization ships carrying representatives from multiple Alliance members set out to explore regions of the galaxy that the Council had declared off limits, seeking not to conquer, but to connect. 5 years after Jake Morrison's dramatic exit from the Council chamber, he stood on the observation deck of the Alliance headquarters on Kepler 442b, watching ships from 100 worlds move through the complex dance of arrival and departure. Now serving as Alliance diplomatic chief, he had overseen the transition from resistance movement to functioning galactic government. Beside him stood his granddaughter, Maya, her eyes wide with wonder as a tiny lightship performed an intricate maneuver that left luminescent patterns trailing through the atmosphere. "Is it true, Grandpa?" she asked, her voice carrying the innocent curiosity of her 8 years. "Did you really start all this by walking out of a meeting?" Jake chuckled, resting a hand on her shoulder. "That's oversimplifying a bit. Many people worked for many years to make this possible. I just provided a catalyst. Like in chemistry." Maya nodded seriously. "Dr. Wright taught us about catalysts last week. They make reactions happen faster." "Exactly like that." Jake smiled at the mention of Helen Wright, whose scientific leadership had been as crucial to the Alliance's success as any political or military action. "Sometimes the galaxy just needs a little push to change in the ways it already wants to." Maya considered this thoughtfully. "My friend Clix says her grandfather was on the Council. She says he was sad when it ended." "I'm sure he was," Jake acknowledged. "Change is hard, even when it's necessary. The Council did some good things over its long history. It just forgot that guiding isn't the same as controlling." "Like how you let me explore the gardens by myself. But you're still watching to make sure I'm safe?" Maya suggested. Jake felt a surge of pride at her insight. "That's a very good comparison." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the continuous flow of traffic that represented the lifeblood of the new galactic order. "The Council thought strength came from authority," Jake said finally. "From being able to tell others what they could and couldn't do. But real strength comes from cooperation, from recognizing that every species, no matter how different, has something valuable to contribute." Maya nodded, though Jake suspected the full significance of his words wouldn't register until she was older. That was fine. She was growing up in a galaxy where such principles were lived rather than merely discussed, where cooperation across differences wasn't an ideal, but a daily reality. As the Tatey lightship completed its atmospheric dance, and new vessels from distant Alliance worlds took its place, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought the galaxy to this point. From a moment of defiance born of accumulated frustration, to a genuine transformation in how diverse species related to one another. The path hadn't been easy. There had been conflicts, setbacks, moments when the entire enterprise seemed on the verge of collapse. But at each critical juncture, the Alliance's commitment to equal partnership and shared decision-making had proven stronger than the forces trying to tear it apart. In the Crystal Chamber on Real Prime, the Council had ruled through division and hierarchy, keeping species separated by arbitrary development classifications and controlled access to knowledge. Here on Kepler 442b, representatives of hundreds of worlds, some ancient and technologically advanced, others newly spacefaring, sat as equals, their diverse perspectives creating solutions that no single species could have devised alone. "I think," Jake said softly, as much to himself as to Maya, "this is what we were meant to be all along." And as ships from across the galaxy continued their elegant dance against the backdrop of a sunset, painted in colors no single species could fully perceive, but which all could appreciate together, he knew it was true. The galaxy had found not just a new political arrangement, but a new understanding of itself, as a community of differences united by common purpose and mutual respect. The age of the Council was over. The age of the Alliance had begun, and Jake Morrison, once a frustrated diplomat enduring the condescension of ancient species, now stood as witness to a transformation more profound than he could have imagined when he turned his back on a crystal chamber and walked toward an uncertain future. In that moment of defiance, he had hoped merely to restore humanity's dignity. Instead, he had helped catalyze a revolution that returned dignity to a galaxy.